This movie is based on the story of the Japanese occupation of Korea in the 1930s. The story begins with Suk-hee, a poor orphan, saying goodbye to her relatives and going to her place of work. After driving all day, she arrives at the boss's house at night. The mansion is a 3-story building, and it is very grand, and an old lady is waiting for her at the door. The old lady explains to her the layout of the mansion's rooms and reminds her to speak like Japanese when talking to the lord and mistress of the mansion, not Korean at all. She introduces her name as Sasaki and shows her to the room where Suk-hee will be staying. The lord of this mansion is a person who is very fond of reading and has bought and collected many books. The mistress of the mansion has to read books to her uncle, the lord of the mansion, every day, and Suk-hee's duty is to help the mistress of the mansion with her chores. The room where Suk-hee is staying is not too far from the room where the mistress of the mansion is, and when she arrives around midnight, she unexpectedly hears the scream of the mistress. Suk-hee rushes into the room to find the frightened and screaming mistress lying on the bed, and she introduces herself as the newly arrived maid. Mistress is having nightmares and tells Suk-hee that her aunt killed herself by hanging herself from the cherry tree in the mansion, and she tells her about seeing his aunt's spirit sometimes. Suk-hee doesn't return to her room that night. Instead, she sleeps next to her frightened mistress. In the morning, after breakfast, the other servants hide one of Suk-hee's shoes, and Suk-hee goes to her mistress with only one shoe. When Suk-hee comes to her mistress, she introduces her name as Tamako, and Sasaki leaves the room. As Mrs. Sasaki leaves, mistress tells Suk-hee in Korean to read the reference letter in her hand. Suk-hee reads what is written in the reference letter, but she can't read some of the Japanese characters because she doesn't understand them. Although she can learn to not read, Miss Hideko tells her never to lie, and Suk-hee promises to never lie to her mistress. Hideko then asks if she knows Count Fujiwara, who sent Suk-hee to work here, and Suk-hee replies that she has never met him and that she only knows him from her aunt. Just like that, Hideko tells Suk-hee to pick up a pair of shoes. From the shoe rack, Suk-hee chooses a normal pair of shoes, and Hideko prepares to entertain her uncle with a reading. Suk-hee asks her to come with her, but she refuses and tells her to stay in the room and leave alone. Suk-hee doesn't listen to Hideko's words and soon changes her clothes and follows Hideko's uncle's reading room. When she enters the room, she sees a snake in front of her, and Hideko closes the door of the room, not allowing her to enter the reading room. After telling her not to come into the room, Suk-hee looks into the reading room and sees Hideko's uncle licking ink with his tongue. When they come home together after reading, Hideko explains to her that her uncle has a habit of licking ink while reading. When they come back to the room, Hideko begins to vomit, not knowing why. The next day, while Suk-hee is having lunch, a servant comes to apologize for hiding her shoe. After lunch, Count Fujiwara will be visiting their residence shortly, so Suk-hee is giving Hideko a bath. Hideko gets a toothache while eating candy, and Suk-hee helps her soothe the toothache with her hands. But when she sees Hideko's beauty while helping to heal her toothache, she has to control her lust. Not long after, Fujiwara arrives and thanks Hideko for giving him such a grand welcome. Fujiwara tells Suk-hee faithfully carried out her duties for her mistress, and Hideko thanked Fujiwara for sending her such an excellent servant. Fujiwara then gives her a silver coin and goes back to his room, where he will rest. A moment later, a servant comes to Hideko and Suk-hee's room and tells them that Fujiwara invited Suk-hee to come to him for a while. When Suk-hee comes with the servant, she comes to the room where Fujiwara is, and when the servant goes back, Suk-hee asks why he fools her with a fake silver coin and throws the silver coin away. In fact, Suk-hee is not a poor handmaiden, as the people watching now think, but a thief. Suk-hee comes to this mansion to help Fujiwara marry Hideko, the mistress of this mansion, and help Fujiwara seize all the inheritance of this mansion. After marrying and confiscating the inheritance, Hideko will be accused of being crazy and sent to a madhouse. Suk-hee's only mission to come to this mansion is to help Hideko get married to Fujiwara, and if the mission is successful, she will get more than $100,000. When Fujiwara says fully ripe, he warns Suk-hee to stay away from them. Fujiwara gives out a gift package, and Suk-hee sends the gift package to Hideko. The gift is a scroll and a pair of earrings, and Hideko is being lied to without knowing the truth, and Suk-hee feels sorry for her, who is very honest. Then, the two of them go downstairs together, and at the downstairs dining room, Hideko's uncle Kuzuki and Fujiwara have already arrived before them. After eating, the two of them go back upstairs together, and for today, Hideko no longer needs to go to his uncle's house to read. The next day, Fujiwara comes to their room and plans to abuse Hideko. Suk-hee is watching the two of them from the side, and at that moment, Fujiwara is eating a fruit on the table and says that it is almost fully ripe. The meaning of these words, as everyone knows, is that Fujiwara asks Suk-hee to leave the room. The next day, Suk-hee and Mistress Hideko go out into the forest to look for vegetables, and Suk-hee tells her that her mother hanged herself, just like her Mrs. Aunt. Hideko talks about how her mother died after giving birth to her, and she is saddened by the thought that her mother's death was because of her. Suk-hee encourages Hideko not to be sad and goes out into the forest to look for mushrooms, but just then, Fujiwara arrives and tries to abuse Hideko again. When Suki returns home after finding the mushroom, she finds Fujiwara and her mistress sitting together, drinking tea in the room. For Suki, even though she sees the bastard abusing her mistress, she doesn't have the strength to fight back. The next day, the three of them go on a trip to the forest to relax, and Suki has to bring painting materials to paint in the forest. But Fujiwara doesn't let her go with them and asks her to get the oil, and Suki rushes home to get the oil. When she comes back, he sees a couple in love, gets very angry, and runs back home. When night comes, Mistress Hideko rings her bell and tells her to sleep next to her. Suki doesn't refuse and sleeps next to his mistress, and Hideko confides in Fujiwara about proposing to her, and when her uncle goes to visit his mines, he tells her he is going to take her to Japan, and she still doesn't accept it, and she reveals about her fear of marrying men, and that night, the two of them can't control themselves, so they kiss for the first time, making love. The next day, Fujiwara plans to abuse Hideko again and asks Suki to leave the room, but Suki doesn't accept what he said and stays in the room. Around noon, Fujiwara finds Suki outside alone, and he begins to find trouble with her. Fujiwara threatens Suki, tells Hideko that she is not really a servant but a pickpocket, and Suki tells him that she doesn't care about anything, and she will also reveal that Fujiwara is pretending to be a count. Just like that, Suki tells Fujiwara not to make it any harder on her mistress Hideko, and she leaves. At night, Suki, while massaging her mistress Hideko, urges her to marry Fujiwara, to which Hideko replies that she doesn't love Fujiwara and that she already has someone to love. Suki urges her to marry Fujiwara again, and Hideko gets angry and throws her out of the room. But the next morning, Hideko has agreed to marry Fujiwara, and her uncle is preparing to go on a trip to his mines, and Fujiwara is off somewhere, pretending to go back to Japan. Around midnight, Suki and Hideko sneak out of the mansion, and Fujiwara comes to meet them by boat. Just like that, the three of them continue their journey across the sea, and before long, they arrive at Fujiwara's home. They get married the night they arrive, and Suki can't sleep well that night because of the noise from the other room. In the morning, Suki looks around the room from outside and sees Hideko, who looks very tired and exhausted, with blood on the bed. Hideko is no longer normal and is like a madman, and Fujiwara gives Suki $100,000, as promised. The next day, Fujiwara brings two officers from the madhouse, and the two officers ask Suki how to treat a madman. Suki replies that they should send her to a quiet place to cure the disease, and just like that, they decide to send Hideko to a hotel. But what they arrive at is a madhouse, not a hotel, and instead of arresting Hideko, the nurses treat Suki as crazy and arrest him. In fact, Hideko has been living with her aunt ever since her mother died, and her aunt's husband always abuses them. Her uncle calls her crazy and threatens to send her to a mental hospital if she doesn't listen to him. The aunt wants to run away, as she doesn't want to see her niece being tortured in front of her, but he closes all the doors to prevent her from running away, and Kozuki asks his wife to teach the young Hideko how to read the sadistic pornography. Hideko is still a child and cannot read well. Kozuki's hobby is to gather around with his friends and listen to a girl read erotic literature and act. As for her aunt, she can't stand her husband anymore, so she hangs herself under the cherry tree next to the mansion. When her aunt dies, Hideko has to read and entertain Kozuki and his friends. One day, a stranger comes to her reading room, and his name is Fujiwara. Fujiwara tells Hideko that he will help her break free from Kozuki's control and seize Kozuki's inheritance. But Hideko replies that her uncle is very cruel and kills her aunt by locking her in the basement as she tries to escape. Saying that, Fujiwara brings out a bottle of potion and tells her that drinking the potion would make her sleep like a dead body all day long. Hideko tells him to bring a servant to her and send that servant to the madhouse in her own name, and that she will leave in that servant's name once she has taken all of her uncle's inheritance. Fujiwara agrees to do as she says, and just like that, Suki arrives at the mansion to work as a servant. At first, Hideko decides to send Suki to the madhouse, but unexpectedly, the two become friends. Hideko slaps the servant who hid Suki's shoes and orders her to apologize. She has to deliberately pretend to make Suki believes that Fujiwara is planning to abuse her. However, Suki is angry from the sidelines, thinking that Fujiwara is abusing his mistress Hideko without knowing the truth. On the night that Suki forces Hideko to marry Fujiwara, she throws Suki out of the room, angry that she is being forced to marry someone she doesn't really love, and she decides to commit suicide by hanging herself under a cherry tree. But she feels a pair of hands grab her legs and looks down to see Suki. Suki apologizes to her with a sad expression, revealing that she was actually a thief who pretended to be a servant to get her married to Fujiwara. Also, Hideko begins to reveal the truth and says that it is Suki who was being lied to, not her, and that Suki will eventually be recognized as crazy and sent to the madhouse under her Hideko's name. Saying that, Suki realizes the truth and decides to team up with Hideko to destroy the enemies. Hideko's uncle Kozuki leaves to visit his mine, so Hideko takes Suki to his uncle's reading room before heading to Fujiwara. When Suki sees the pornographic books in the reading room that Hideko uses to read every day, she gets angry, tears them all up, and destroys them. And then they run outside the mansion, crossing the wide field, looking very happy, like two parrots that have escaped from their cage. In order to convince Fujiwara, they pretend that Suki is actually sent to the madhouse under the name of Hideko, and then Fujiwara asks her to marry him again. At that time, Suki sets the madhouse on fire, and while other people were busy focusing on the fire, she unchains her leg and runs away from the madhouse. At that time, Hideko puts the potion given by Fujiwara into the wine and forces him to drink the wine using her feminine wiles. When Fujiwara falls asleep under the effects of the drug, she puts the money on the bed in a bag and runs away from Fujiwara's house. When Fujiwara regains consciousness, he sees two of Kozuki's disciples waiting nearby, and they take him to their lord. Kozuki is so angry that he cuts off Fujiwara's fingers and banana with a knife and destroys him. At that time, Suki dresses Hideko as a boy, and the two of them run away to a place where Kozuki can't find them, and the two begin to live happily as friends who love each other very much.